Welcome to the book of Shmuel Bet, chapter 5, Perek, where we have the United Kingdom, not the one you're thinking about, but rather the United Kingdom of Israel, of the different tribes, and where King David is really able to establish his kingdom. So King David HaMelech, is now in Hebron for 7.5 years. Unfortunately, we saw the assassination of Mephibosheth, we saw the assassination of Avner, and so there's really no natural successor. And so all the tribes of Israel, not just Yehudah, come to David and they say, you should be our king. The elders of all of the tribes of Israel come to David HaMelech and they say, look, you should be our next king, and he indeed accepts it. Now it's time for a new capital city that can unite the entire people of Israel. David starts his kingdom at the age of 30, and he rules for an astonishing 40 years. He says, okay, now it's time to take Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to be the capital city. He was in Hebron for 7.5 years, and then he'll be in Jerusalem for 33 years. David HaMelech decides to take Jerusalem, except as we know from our own history, conquering Jerusalem with all of its wall and its topographical strategic advantages is not an easy thing. So what does David HaMelech do? He says it's so difficult to conquer this place that the guards of the city are blind and they are crippled. They can't even walk and they can't even see, but they can guard the city. Why? Because the walls of the city is so fortified that it's just you need someone sitting at the door. And so David HaMelech says, you know what? Whoever can do this, wow, you're gonna be amazing. And David HaMelech with his people, they conquer the city despite the Ivrim and Pischim, despite the blind and the crippled that were guarding it. And David takes Metzudat Tzion. Metzudat means a fortress, and he takes it. David takes Metzudat Tzion, which is known as Ir David, and from there he is able to take the rest of the city. I, by the way, highly recommend, if you're ever in Jerusalem, to go visit the city of David, where you can see where this happened. And David is like very angry at the guards that held the city until then. And fine, success. So what happened? David takes Jerusalem. First he takes Metzudat Tzion, then he takes the rest of the city, and he establishes his kingdom in Jerusalem. He's very successful, and now his success is already heard over the region. And so Hiram, the king of Tyre, which is now Lebanon, hears now Lebanon in general has the most powerful and mighty cedars, and every ruler wants to build his palace from cedar because it's such a huge tree that you can take really large beams and build a very luxurious palace. We'll see later that Hiram also is the one to provide the lumber for the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. And Hiram sends a gift to David, all this beautiful cedar, and he sends people to help build the palace of David HaMelech, which basically means David is internationally recognized as the king of a mighty, powerful Israel. David, in the meantime, gets married, has more children, and he has many, many more children. I'll list the names. He has Shamua, Shovav, Natan, Shlomo, Yivchar, Elishua, Nefeg, Yafia, Elishama, Eliadai, Eliphelet. But there's always haters. And who are the haters? The Plishtim. The Plishtim hear that David has ruled over Israel successfully, and they decided to go to war against David HaMelech. So David HaMelech hears that they're going to come. He goes to Metzudat David, to his fortress, and they are ready to confront him in Emek Rephaim. He goes to fight them in Emek Rephaim, and he asks Hashem, are you going to let me beat them? Are you going to let me defeat them? Am I going to win? And Hashem says, yes, go fight them. So David goes from his Metzudah, from his fortress, and he combats the Plishtim in Emek Rephaim. He crushes them. However, then they regroup and they go to another place. But David calls the place where he won them, Emek Rephaim, he calls it Baal Pratzim, because the word Peretz means to puncture something, and so David is able to puncture Plishtim. He calls the place Baal Pratzim. It should be noted that Yehudah's children, who are the grandparents of David, ancestors, are also called Peretz. He has an ancestor called Peretz. All right, the Plishtim now are regrouped in another place, and They gather again in Emek Rephaim, and David asks Hashem again, should I go fight them? And Hashem says, actually, you shouldn't. You should surround them, and you should come from a place called Bechaim and do an ambush. So come from behind them, do an ambush, and indeed David does that, and he crushes them all the way from Geva to Gezer. So what did we have in chapter 5? We had David HaMelech establishing his kingdom. The elders of Israel all come to him and anoint him while he's in Hebron. He's been in Hebron for 7.5 years. He decides to conquer Jerusalem, which is so heavily guarded that the blind and the cripple are able to guard it. Then he eventually takes it, and he gets very angry at the blind and crippled guards. And David then establishes his kingdom. First he took Mitzvah Zion, then he took the rest of the city of David, of Jerusalem, and that is his kingdom. He's so acknowledged that Hiram, the king of Tzor, decides to send professional craftsmen with timber from Lebanon, and they build David's palace in Jerusalem. David gets married and has more children, marries more women, has more children. And then Plishtim decides to ambush an Emek Rephaim. David asks Hashem. He goes, he crushes them. He calls the place Baal Pratzim. And then there's another round in Emek Rephaim, and Hashem says, don't attack them. Go rather from the other side. That has been Perek Hey.